Hi everyone, welcome back to the Cluster Fudge Podcast, where we tackle the mess, the madness and the misunderstood issues that shape our lives. I'm your host Alexandra. Today's episode, it's personal, it's practical, and yes, it's political, but not in the way you might think. It's called Vote in Every Election, especially the local government ones. That's if you want a better America. Because if you're frustrated, fed up, or just plain tired of how things are run, guess what? You have more power than you think. And the real revolution? It's in your city hall, your school board, your district court. Let's break this all the way down. The myth that dominates, we're told by media, by culture, even by school, that only presidential or congressional elections count. But that's a myth. Presidential elections do grab headlines, flashy debates, national ads, coast-to-coast coverage. But real change, the kind that affects your life every day, happens much closer to home. 2. Low local turnout versus high national numbers. There's a sharp drop-off in participation once we shift from federal to local ballots. In 2020, about 66% of voting-eligible Americans voted in the presidential election, the highest turnout in decades. In contrast, local elections, mayoral, school boards, city council, often draw just 15 to 27% turnout of eligible voters. Even in big cities, New York City's 2021 mayoral race drew only 23% of registered voters, even though the presidential election the year before topped 53%. Overall, only 1 in 5 eligible voters show up for mayoral or local contests. This means your local vote carries more weight than your vote in federal battles, especially in tight, small races that turn on just a few votes. 3. Why this gap exists. There are structural and psychological forces at play. Off-cycle timing. Many local elections happen in odd-year or non-federal years, on random dates away from national buzz. That depresses turnout again and again. National races get wall-to-wall coverage, while local races often live in news deserts with minimal reporting. Voter confusion or apathy, lengthy ballots with unknown names, school boards, water districts, judges, it all feels overwhelming. Many simply tune out. Real consequences of the myth. Here's what happens when that myth goes unchallenged. Officials get elected with tiny vote tallies, sometimes just 2,000 votes in districts with tens of thousands of residents, or even won by coin tosses. Decisions about zoning, school funding, policing, transit, budgeting, environmental regulation, all made by local officials, get decided by a handful of highly motivated voters. Demographic skew. Affluent older voters tend to turn out more. Young people and people of colour vote at significantly lower rates in local elections, which means policies don't represent their interests. Why that myth persistently benefits the few, those in power, special interests, lobbyists, political machines, thrive under low turnout. When fewer people vote, decisions fall to a small slice of highly engaged and often ideologically narrow constituencies. Those constituents are easy to lobby and influence. Incumbents face little challenge and voters lose accountability. 6. Myth versus reality. What the data reveal, while federal races get 60 to 66% turnout among eligible voters, local races see turnout often less than half that, averaging 15 to 30% of eligible voters. Yet local officials make decisions on property taxes, water infrastructure, schools, policing, land use, housing, and more, all of which shape your daily life. So don't buy the lie. Your vote does matter. Your local ballot does determine how your city runs. Apathy or confusion doesn't just cost you power, it costs your whole community. That's precisely why this episode begins here. Shattering the myth that only big elections matter is the first step toward empowering yourself and everyone around you to demand better. Let's pull back the curtain and be brutally honest. When you don't vote, especially in your local elections, someone still wins. Someone still gets elected. Policy still gets made. Budgets still get passed. And your absence? It's not neutral. It's not harmless. It's an open invitation to the people who profit off of your silence. So let's ask the real question. Who actually benefits when you don't show up at the polls? Because democracy doesn't go on pause when you opt out. It just shifts into the hands of those who didn't. The first, and perhaps the biggest, beneficiaries are lobbyists and special interest groups. These organisations don't sit out elections, ever. They show up with money, resources, and strategy. And when voter turnout is low, their influence becomes disproportionately high. A utility company that wants to dodge environmental regulation, they donate to local commissioners. A landlord lobby that wants to block rent control, they fund city council campaigns. A private charter network that wants to dismantle public schools, they quietly influence your school board races. When voters stay home, these groups get louder. And without pushback from the people, elected officials listen and cater to the only voices they hear, the donors, not the residents. Low voter turnout creates a playground for corruption. It removes public accountability. It turns elections into private auctions. Incumbents and career politicians want to know who loves when you don't vote, the person already in power. Incumbents, no matter how ineffective, unpopular, or scandal-ridden, almost always have the upper hand when turnout is low. They benefit from name recognition. They have a built-in network of donors. They control messaging with local media. And most importantly, they bank on voter apathy. It's a rigged cycle. Low turnout, less competition, same people re-elected, little change, more apathy. Repeat. In some small-town elections, incumbents have been re-elected with as little as 5% of eligible voters casting ballots. That's not democracy. That's inherited power, dressed up as representation. And unless voters break that cycle, nothing improves. Not the roads, not the schools, not the justice system, just the same people pushing the same broken policies. Now, here's a sneakier benefit. When you don't vote, unelected power structures gain ground. Let's say your city elects a district attorney, a judge, or a sheriff. These positions often fly under the radar, yet they wield enormous power. District attorneys decide who gets prosecuted and who doesn't. They shape sentencing patterns, plea deals, and jail populations. Judges influence everything from eviction hearings to juvenile justice outcomes to civil rights. Sheriffs control jails, policing priorities, and enforcement of controversial laws. When voters ignore these races, these powerful offices are often filled by hardline tough-on-crime candidates, funded by police unions or conservative PACs. Result? More racial bias in sentencing, more criminalization of poverty, less accountability for law enforcement abuses, more militarized policing. If you're someone who says you care about justice, mass incarceration, or community safety, you can't afford to sit out these elections. Ever wonder why certain neighborhoods keep getting gentrified while others are left to rot? Meet the developers, real estate investors, and wealthy landowners who love low turnout elections. Because when you don't vote, they get zoning laws changed in their favor. They get permits to build luxury housing while affordable units disappear. They influence planning boards, city councils, and mayors who prioritize profit over people. This is how working-class neighborhoods are displaced, how rent skyrockets, how public land becomes private, all because the people most affected didn't have a seat at the table or didn't know the meeting was happening. Remember, developers don't need a majority of the people. They just need a majority of those who show up, which is often less than 20% of voters. Let's get real. Local election turnout isn't just low, it's skewed. Statistically speaking, older voters, 65 plus, dominate local elections. Homeowners turn out more than renters. White voters vote at significantly higher rates than Black, Latino, and Asian communities in municipal races. Wealthier and more educated citizens are overrepresented in local voting patterns. What does that mean? The people who don't have to worry about police harassment, eviction, student loan debt, or underfunded schools are the ones whose voices are heard loudest in city halls. Meanwhile, working-class communities, immigrants, Gen Z and renters, people with the most at stake, are often shut out simply by not showing up. This isn't accidental, it's systemic, and it's fixable. Here's a scary truth. Low turnout elections are fertile ground for extremists. When regular voters check out, the door opens for conspiracy theorists, culture war crusaders, anti-democracy candidates, anti-science school board members, and they win, not because most people agree with them, but because most people didn't even know they were running. We've seen school boards taken over by people banning books. We've seen mayors elected who openly support hate groups. We've seen local governments push regressive, dangerous policies, all with less than a quarter of eligible voters participating. The fewer people who vote, the easier it is to hijack democracy. So let's be crystal clear. Your silence doesn't protect you. It empowers someone else. When you don't vote, lobbyists win, incumbents win, developers win, extremists win, and marginalized communities lose. Every time. You don't need to know every policy detail. You don't need to be a political expert, but you do need to show up because your absence is being used against you. And the people pulling the strings, they're counting on that. So next time you think, it's just a local election, remember, it's never just a local election. It's your neighborhood, your schools, your future. And someone else is voting like it matters. Let's clear up one of the most dangerous misunderstandings in American civic life. The belief that real power only exists at the national level in the White House, in Congress, in the Supreme Court. But here's the truth. Local government has far more direct influence on your everyday life than federal government ever will. That may sound bold, but once we lay it all out, it's impossible to ignore. If you care about what happens in your daily life, in your community, your street, your home, then local politics isn't just important. It's everything. Let's break down why. Local government controls what you see, feel, and experience daily. Think about your daily life, your commute, your trash pickup, your water, the park down the street, the police presence on your block, your child's education, the noise ordinance at night. Now ask, who's in charge of all that? Not the president, not Congress, not the Supreme Court. It's your local government. Here's what local officials actually control. City council, county supervisors pass ordinances and local laws, allocate city or county budgets, approve development projects, fund parks, public safety, libraries, youth programs. Mayors, city managers oversee day-to-day operations of your town, respond to emergencies, floods, public health, snowstorms, coordinate with state, federal governments. School boards decide curriculum, including sex ed, history, science standards, set teacher pay and hiring policy, approve school closures, reopenings and renovations. District attorneys and sheriffs control what crimes get prosecuted and what don't, set bail policies, plea bargains, diversion programs, decide whether to pursue police misconduct cases, influence jail and incarceration practices. Zoning boards and housing authorities decide where apartments get built, determine if affordable housing gets approved, influence neighborhood density, public transit access, and gentrification. All of these roles are either directly elected or appointed by someone you elect. That means your vote shapes your city in immediate, tangible ways. Local is where innovation and policy experiments begin. Contrary to popular belief, big national change often starts with small, local experiments. Here are some real-world examples. $15 minimum wage, first passed in SeaTac, Washington, 2013, spread to Seattle, then California, then the national stage. Police body cameras, first piloted in Oakland and Rialto, California, spread nationwide following local successes and public pressure. Climate resilience plans, cities like New Orleans, New York, and Miami led adaptation efforts long before federal action. Sanctuary city policies started with cities like San Francisco and Chicago choosing to shield immigrants from federal deportation efforts. Marijuana legalization began with local ballot measures, decriminalization, and city-level pilot programs, universal pre-K and child nutrition programs, piloted by cities like Denver, New York, Boston before scaling statewide or federally. This is what political scientists call policy laboratories. Cities and counties test new approaches, show what works, and pressure higher levels of government to catch up. If you care about equity, racial justice, or economic fairness, local government is the front line. Let's start with law enforcement and criminal justice. Your district attorney decides whether to prosecute drug possession, whether to divert youth offenders into treatment or lock them up, whether to charge officers who commit abuse. Your sheriff oversees county jails, sets immigration enforcement policy, and determines use of force practices. Your judges rule on evictions, traffic tickets, juvenile justice, child custody, and misdemeanors, often without much public scrutiny. This is structural power. And most Americans don't realize how much authority local justice officials have to either dismantle or reinforce broken systems. In fact, More than 80% of criminal prosecutions in the US are handled at the local level. Judges and DAs are elected in most jurisdictions, yet voter participation in these races is usually the lowest on the ballot. That means if you care about the criminalization of poverty, the racial sentencing gap, mass incarceration, or access to public defenders, your local vote is a direct line to change. Your child's future is on the ballot every year. What gets taught in your child's school isn't determined in Washington. It's set by your local school board. These boards decide on textbooks, reading lists, and science standards, debate whether to ban books, censor history, or exclude LGBTQ+ perspectives, choose how much funding goes toward arts, sports, mental health, and special education, determine if public funds are diverted to private or charter schools. During the pandemic, local school board meetings became battlegrounds for debates over mask mandates, critical race theory, gender identity policies, sex ed curriculum, school resource officers. Who you elect shapes whether your local school becomes a place of inclusive education or ideological censorship, and most people don't even know who's on their school board. Housing, transportation, and environment, it's all local. Your local leaders decide where housing gets built, whether it's affordable or luxury, whether public transit expands or crumbles, whether bike lanes are prioritised, whether green space is preserved or paved over, whether your town embraces climate resilience or ignores it. Want to stop gentrification? Elect pro-housing, anti-displacement city officials. Want to reduce emissions and pollution? Vote for transit-supportive local leadership. Want to protect renters? You need local ordinances, not federal wish lists. Even basic infrastructure, your roads, sidewalks, water pipes, sewers, are maintained with local budgets and bond measures, which you often vote on directly. In Flint, Michigan, lead poisoned an entire community because of local decisions. In Jackson, Mississippi, entire neighborhoods went without clean water for weeks, again a local infrastructure failure. Federal politics sets the frame. Local politics sets the stage. National politics gives us headlines. Local politics gives us outcomes. Yes, the president signs laws and appoints justices. Congress debates budgets and wars. But the implementation of policy happens locally. The consequences of funding decisions show up locally. And the interpretation of national laws often begins in local courts and agencies. Your city, your county, your state, these are the places where political ideology becomes public policy. Your life is local. Your vote should be too. Here's the takeaway. If you're only voting once every 4 years, you're not using your voice. You're lending it to someone else. Your local government is where power meets your paycheck, law meets your family, policy meets your front door. And that means your vote at the city or county level is not a small action. It's one of the most important things you can do to change your own life and the lives of your neighbours. So no more treating local elections like they're optional. They're not. They're essential, they're urgent, and they're yours. So let's be honest. Ballots can be overwhelming. You show up to vote and suddenly it's not just president or senator on the line. It's water district representatives, school board members, bond measures, propositions with 10 pages of legalese, and judges whose names sound vaguely familiar but whose track records you've never heard of. Confused? You're supposed to be. That confusion isn't a bug in the system. It's a feature, because the more confused you are, the less likely you are to vote or to vote meaningfully. And that confusion, that civic fog, it benefits one group more than anyone else, the people already in power. The complexity is deliberate. Why are ballots long and cluttered? Why is voter education so lacking? Because complexity is a powerful form of suppression. Let's break it down. Obscure titles like county recorder or municipal utility board director sound unimportant, but these offices control your elections and your water. Legal jargon in propositions makes it hard to tell what a yes or no vote actually means. Judicial elections often list a dozen names, with no party affiliation and little media coverage. Randomised election dates, many local elections are held in off years or odd months, make them harder to track and easier to miss. This is intentional voter fatigue. The system is designed so that only the most informed or the most connected can navigate it fully. And when most people are overwhelmed, they leave parts of the ballot blank, vote based on name recognition, which favours incumbents, don't vote at all, which is exactly what the power structure wants. Information gaps are manufactured. Why is it so hard to find reliable information about local candidates? Because there's little media coverage of down-ballot races. Most newsrooms are underfunded, understaffed, or focused on national issues that draw clicks. And when local media does report, it often relies on press releases, party endorsements, or sponsored interviews, not investigative journalism. This creates what civic scholars call news deserts, entire regions with no consistent local news outlet. And in the absence of trusted local media, misinformation thrives. Campaigns go unscrutinised, voters remain in the dark. Even social media, for all its noise, rarely elevates local election content to your feed. It's built to prioritise virality, not civic literacy. Ballot design is confusing on purpose. The way ballots are structured, especially in states with propositions or initiatives, makes informed voting harder than it needs to be. Legal language is overly technical, filled with phrases like notwithstanding subsection 3A or levy of ad valorem taxes. Propositions are often written in reverse logic. A yes vote might actually mean rejecting a change, while a no vote keeps the status quo. Descriptions are often biased. The title of the measure is written by officials who may support or oppose it. Judges appear without context. No bio, no record, no explanation of their rulings or ideology. If it feels like a pop quiz you didn't study for, it's because no one gave you the textbook. The end result? You walk in wanting to be engaged and leave feeling defeated. Judicial races, the black hole of democracy. Let's talk about judges, one of the most important and least understood sections of your ballot. Judges decide eviction cases, custody battles, civil suits, criminal sentencing, bail amounts, traffic fines and more. Yet most voters either skip judicial races or vote based on last names, political rumours or vague impressions. Why? Because judges run as non-partisan candidates, hiding ideology behind neutral labels. There's often no media coverage of their past rulings. Campaign finance laws make it hard to trace who supports them. This is a huge problem. Judges can stay on the bench for decades. Some make thousands of rulings per year. And unless they do something outrageous, they face no public accountability. Unless you, the voter, show up informed. When judges go unexamined, justice becomes unbalanced. That's not confusion. That's a quiet coup. They want you to feel embarrassed to ask questions. Another tool of suppression is social shame. Ever feel embarrassed to say, I don't know what this proposition means, or I've never heard of this school board candidate? That's by design, because when civic knowledge becomes a litmus test for intelligence, people who are unsure stay silent. This disproportionately affects first-time voters, young voters, immigrants, people with limited formal education. But here's the truth. You're not stupid for being confused. You've just been underserved. You were never meant to be an expert in water policy or judicial review. The system is supposed to provide voter guides, candidate forums, ballot breakdowns. The fact that it doesn't, that's not your fault. That's the system failing you on purpose. Here's the big takeaway. Your confusion is someone else's control. The more disoriented you are, the more likely someone else gets to decide what your city funds, who enforces your laws, what your kids learn, where your tax money goes, whether your neighbourhood changes or gets erased. But that power collapses when you take control of your ballot. And it doesn't take a PhD in public policy to do that. It just takes curiosity. Ask questions, even if they feel dumb. Talk with friends, family, neighbours about what's on the ballot. Use free voter resources to decode every item come. Here are a few easy-to-use, free and non-partisan tools to break through the noise. Ballotready.org. Please open your app to see this link. Personalised, non-partisan ballot breakdown with candidate stances and endorsements. Vote4111.org. Please open your app to see this link. A project by the League of Women Voters offering plain language explanations of ballot measures. Ballotpedia.org. Please open your app to see this link. A detailed encyclopedia of elections, candidates, and ballot initiatives in your area. Your local elections office website often posts sample ballots and voter guides. Also, Follow non-partisan civic orgs on social media, like When We All Vote, Common Cause, or League of Women Voters. Attend or stream a candidate forum. Most are on YouTube these days. Email candidates with questions. You'd be surprised how often they reply. And remember, you don't have to know everything, just enough to make a choice with intention. Confusion is their weapon. Clarity is your shield. They want you overwhelmed. They want you to skip the small races. They want you to check out because that keeps the same old game running without interruption. But when you start paying attention, when you educate yourself and even just a few others, when the system starts to shift. So the next time you look at your ballot and feel overwhelmed, stop and breathe. Because now you know the fog is artificial. And your vote? It's the light that cuts through. Let's get real for a moment. I'm just one person. What difference can I make? That phrase, that tired, hopeless, defeated phrase, is not only wrong, it's dangerous. It's the single most effective excuse used to dismantle democracy from the inside out. And worst of all, it's exactly what those in power want you to believe. Because when one person gives up, 10 more follow. When 10 stop voting, 100 are silenced. When 100 stay home on election day, the door swings wide open for corruption, complacency, and policy that only serves a privileged few. The myth of the powerless voter. Let's dismantle this myth together. Yes, you're one person, but you're part of a neighborhood, a community, a city, a state, a country. Every movement, every revolution, every social shift in history has started with one person deciding they would no longer sit it out. That one person could be the first woman in your county to run for school board, the guy who got the neighborhood together to fight against a polluting factory, the young voter who convinced 10 friends to register and those 10 changed the course of a city council race. You think you're too small to matter? Ask the people in Flint, Michigan, if local leadership mattered when it came to their water supply. Ask LGBTQ+ youth in states passing anti-trans legislation if school board members mattered when it came to bathroom policies and books. Ask the teachers, nurses, and essential workers whose wages and rights are set not by the president, but by city ordinances and local laws. Apathy is an algorithm. And let's not pretend your apathy is yours alone. It's been programmed, cultivated, fed to you in social media echo chambers, news cycles that only cover national drama, and civic education that ends somewhere around 8th grade. You've been led to believe that politics is too complicated. Your vote doesn't count. It's all corrupt anyway, so why bother? But the truth is, your voice is currency, and the less you use it, the less it's worth. Small numbers, big consequences. Here's a fact most people don't know. Many local elections are decided by fewer than 1,000 votes, some by a few dozen. In 2021, a city council race in South Carolina was decided by one single vote. One. So when you say I'm just one person, realize you might be the person who changes everything. You might be the tiebreaker. You might be the tipping point. You might be the person who inspires 10 others to believe they matter too. The compound power of one. Think of voting like ripples in a pond. You may not see the full effect right away, but it's real. It grows and it spreads. If you show up, not just during presidential elections, but during every off-year, primary, runoff, and especially local vote, you're creating a pattern of power. And if enough people do it, the system bends. And eventually it breaks the way it was rigged and begins to rebuild. That's how movements happen. That's how justice grows. That's how everyday people like you shape history. So no, you are not just one person. You are one voter, one voice, one vote. And in a democracy, that's the most powerful role there is. Let's stop using powerlessness as a shield. Let's stop pretending silence is safety. Let's show up every time. Because if you don't believe in your own power, the people who do believe in theirs will write the future for you. And they may not have your best interests at heart. Let's bring it home. All episode long, we've peeled back the layers. We've exposed the lie that only big elections matter. We've unpacked who benefits when you stay home. We've explored the massive, immediate impact that local government has on your daily life. And we've confronted the dangerous myth that your one vote, your one voice, doesn't matter. Now it's time to ground all of this in a simple truth. A better America doesn't start with a president. It starts with a pothole, a school book, a zoning law, a neighbour, a block. Change isn't a speech. It's a series of decisions. We've been conditioned to think that national politics is the only arena worth watching, that the big names and big races are the real game changers. But let me be clear. The soul of this country is not decided in Washington. It's decided in living rooms, town halls, libraries, public forums, school board meetings, county clerk offices, and most of all at your local polling place. Want racial justice? That starts with who hires and trains your police force. Want better schools? That starts with who sits on your school board. Want clean drinking water? That starts with your city's infrastructure budget. Want rent to stop skyrocketing? That starts with your local housing policies. Want more mental health funding, better roads, protected green space, and access to childcare? That's local. And if you think local elections are boring, that's not an accident. The system wants you bored. It wants you to scroll past it, to ignore it, because that's when the shady deals happen. That's when corporate interests slide in unnoticed. That's when extremist voices gain power by default because no one else showed up. But what happens when we do show up? Block by block, the foundation shifts. Neighbourhood by neighbourhood, the system starts to reflect us. City by city, equity becomes policy. County by county, decency becomes law. State by state, justice becomes the standard. That is how you build a better America, not by waiting for a hero, but by becoming a participant. We are the revolution. So here's your call to action. Not some abstract ideal, but a real doable thing. Know your voting dates. Not just the federal ones, the local ones too. Know who's running, research their platforms, look into their records, talk about it with friends, co-workers, neighbours, family. Vote in every election. Show up when it's easy and show up when it's not. Hold your officials accountable. Stay informed. Speak up. Because democracy isn't a product, it's a process. And the most American thing you can do isn't complain. It's vote, not just every 4 years. Not just when it feels exciting, but every single time. When we treat every election like it matters, it will. When we show up in numbers, we shift power. When we engage locally, we build nationally. The ballot is your brick. The community is your blueprint. And the neighbourhood? That's your battlefield. So if you want a better America, a more compassionate, more just, more sane America, don't wait for it to be handed to you from the top down. Build it. Vote for it. Block by block. Person by person. Precinct by precinct. Because the future doesn't live in Washington, it lives on your street, and it starts with you.